12:58. Let me just express appreciation to, well, I guess I should. Yeah, let's go. In this, I think this might be. I think I've had one other press conference that I participated in my entire 16-year political career, so this is not something we do all the time. I want to make some remarks and get us going, and then I'm going to call on Saeed, and then somewhere in that process, I'm going to have to make a beeline to Naples, where I'm obligated to attend a meeting down there. So if you see me disappear a little late or quietly, it's because I need to get to that obligation. And if there's a need or anybody wants to chat sometime later this evening or tomorrow, we'll be coming back up for Market Watch. You guys going to Market Watch tonight? So I'll probably see you there. Christian, are we ready? Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for attending this press conference. My name is Randall Henderson. I'm the mayor of Fort Myers, and I am joined by Councilwoman Gail Anthony and Councilman Johnny Streets and Councilman Forrest Banks. And we're here to make some announcements to give the press an update on some progress that's been made on initiatives that I'll say that the council inspired over the last 24 months. So let me just take you back in time a little bit. This has to do with law enforcement and best practices and how we can do things better. The city of Fort Myers has been going through a series of evaluations, self-evaluating, if you will. We have looked at our fire department. We're looking at our community development department. We're looking at all operations across the board. And there's a reason for this. The last 24 months, we have transitioned into new city leadership with the arrival of City Manager Saeed Kazemi. We've hired a new police chief. We are currently in the process of looking for a new community development leader. And we've hired, or Saeed has hired, I should say, a new fire chief. I will say along about 18 to 24 months ago, in a meeting with Grant Alley, I think Grant's here, he may have had to leave, and on the subject of law enforcement, we interviewed, Grant and I did, a lady named Nicole Wade. Nicole Wade had been working here in this jurisdiction as a federal prosecutor, had left that post and become a private lawyer working with a firm, I think out of Washington, D.C., but was assigned to this area. And Grant Alley and I, just as an act of trying to initiate some activity, thought that it would be a good idea to engage Ms. Wade for the purposes of giving us some advice on a similar fashion, the way we've examined the police department, the building department, some advice on our law enforcement agency. Let me also say that some of this has been inspired by citizens of Fort Myers who have said that they've been unhappy with our police department. They think that they've been mistreated, made assertions that the council is not pleased with, that we don't like hearing. We have no day-to-day jurisdiction over that matter, and so we rely on city management to address those issues. And we would simply say to citizens, if you know of something, help us. You know, give us some information, give us something to go on. You don't have to look far across America to find strife and challenges with law enforcement. The anti-law enforcement sentiment that exists in this nation today is very heartbreaking. And the city of Fort Myers values its law enforcement officers, men and women, and we're going to support them and help them in all the ways that we can. And so this process is aimed at that. Nicole Wade and Grant Alley and I sat one morning, and we discussed some ways that we might be able to do better, and she gave us some, I think, some really good advice. And that was the first time I learned about the Louis Free Agency. And so Grant and I talked about that, and later on that year, city manager dismissed Doug Baker, and then city manager retired, and we find ourselves with new interim leadership in the throes of doing a national search for a police chief. And we found a good one in Derek Diggs. And so we've been through a lot of transition. I want to thank Saeed Kazemi for taking initiative to take that information that Grant and I learned about through Nicole Wade and say, hey, here's an idea, Mr. City Manager, coming from an informed source. Why don't you take it and run with it? And he did. He petitioned the council to engage the Louis Free Agency, and the council listened, and they said, sounds like a reasonable idea. We reached out to them. We got a proposal. Soon thereafter, we shortlisted the candidates to be our chief. We selected our chief in a unanimous vote right here in these chambers, 7-0. And then we asked the chief about his thoughts about engaging the Louis Free Agency. He said, yes, I think that's a good idea. And here we are today. So, Saeed, I thank you on behalf of the council for bringing the opportunity forward, looking into those suggestions that Nicole Wade made to Grant and I that day, some 18 months, 24 months ago, whatever the time frame was. You took the ball, you ran with it. Saeed believes and the council believes in continuous improvement. The needs assessment that's going to be presented today will be revealing to us ways that we can improve in the short and long term, and so we're looking forward to that. Council and myself have confidence in the team's recommendations. We have confidence in Chief Diggs to take our department forward. Our first commitment is to safety to our citizens, and so citizens who've made comments to us over the years that they're concerned in many respects. Today is your day. The council really has no way to elicit this kind of information, so we rely on the skill set of our city leadership to do that. And Saeed, I think you've really done a good thing here, and I thank you for it on behalf of the council. With that, I'm going to ask Saeed Kazemi to come forward at this point. By the way, let me just share the report we've received today has been released to all the council. I'm sure we were in session all morning, so I'm sure my colleagues have not had a chance to get into that report. I'm heading to Naples. I will not get a chance to read that report until late tonight, if I'm able to do that without falling asleep. But it's going to be a priority for me to get my mind wrapped around that as soon as possible in the next few days. And I know that my colleagues will do the same thing. So keep in mind, especially for the press, that the council and myself are going to have some time to get into the detail of the report. And I'm sure that even Saeed has not had what I would call adequate time, to get into the report. So what we're going to try to do today, let me also recognize Kirsten and Phyllis. This is another area that Saeed Kazemi said that we needed improvement in. So in the interest of executing on these kinds of activities, we have professional public relations experts on staff now available to us to make us more communicative to the press and citizens. Hopefully we can be more professional in this regard. They have certainly brought a sense of professionalism to the city that we once had back before the Great Recession, and due to budgetary concerns, had to eliminate that part of our operations, and that's an important part of our city operations. So Kirsten and Phyllis, I want to extend our appreciation on behalf of the council and the city for helping us to be as transparent as we can possibly be, assisting Chief Diggs, and I think Saeed is even hiring a professional for the police department. Not that Jay Rodriguez isn't doing an amazing job, and I commend you, sir, for the work that you've done in that regard. You've been absolutely stellar, and you're a consummate professional. and we appreciate you as we do all of our men and women in blue. So with that, Saeed, I'm going to call on you now to take it from here. The council's eager to learn, and the rest of the world's eager to learn what's going on.
Thank you.
Thank you, and welcome.
Good afternoon, Saeed Kazemi, City Manager. Mayor said most of the things that I was going to say, but when I got appointed in February, and that was the mission I had, I wanted to make sure that we have some assessment in most of our departments, and the police department was on the top. So what I did was I brought to the council in May of 2016 the proposals. And fortunately, council is always behind the good decisions that the staff makes, and they directed me and approved a contract with the free group. And that started on May 16th of 2016. Well, we decided, since we were at the merge of what Mayor was saying, the hiring the chief, we didn't do much, except just that having the contract signed with the free group for a couple of months, because chief started in August of 2016, and the free group didn't start the actual work until September of 2016. So in September of 2016, they are the one, they just got in there and start doing whatever they did, and they're going to talk about that. So the process started early on, but the actual work, because we wanted the chief to be in place and to buy into that, to make sure that the chief is okay with what we were going to do, since this is going to be his, under his leadership and the implementations. So in September, they started the work. And this is truly, it's like just Mayor said, it's the audit. It's just a financial audit of any departments. They did the audit of the department to make sure what it works, what it doesn't work. And that's what their report is going to say, and they're going to go through some of the findings. But we wanted to know, as a city manager, I wanted to make sure that I understand what's going on in that department. And the chief that is the new chief, he understands what is he getting into and what it needs to be done, what it needs to be improved. And that's how I started it. And that's how we made that investment. And that investment is going to pay off in the years to come to make sure that we implement most of the actually all of the recommendations that they are proposing. So it's going to take time. It's not going to happen tomorrow, but it's a probably 5-year process that it needs to go through. But we have a roadmap right now. We have a roadmap that we are going to follow. And that is the roadmap that we didn't have. Actually, as a management, I didn't have. Police chief didn't have. So we have a roadmap that we are going to follow. And that's why I'm very pleased to get this report at this time. And this is a time that we need to do whatever it takes, whatever it needs, to make sure our departments, which is the finest today, it's going to be the best in this area. Today it is the best and the finest, but we're going to make it improvements. And that's where we are here today, to tell you what it is, but it's going to take time. What I'm asking is, be with us and give us some time. We will get it there, and we'll make sure that we will get there. So at this time, I'd like to introduce one of the team members from Free Group, Mr. Bobby O'Neill, who was very instrumental to this process, and he was all the way with the group, and most of you know him. He's been in the police department most of the last, I'd say, 6-7 months, and they really did just went into the department and they make sure that they understood the department, not just reading some documents and evaluating it. They wanted to understand the department, and they went truly inside and they find out what it is and what it needs to be done. But I just don't want to take too much of your time. I appreciate it, but Mr. O'Neill. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Robert O'Neill, and I'm a managing director at Free Group, and I also worked on this engagement with Thomas Larned, who's seated behind Mr. Kazemi, and we were the two principal members of the Free Group working on this engagement. I'd like to begin by saying it was truly a privilege to do this engagement and be retained by the city of Fort Myers to look into the police department. We call this a needs assessment. You'll hear different words, audit, evaluation, but we were brought in by the city with no strictures placed on us. We were given unfettered access to the department and all its members. And I don't know if I could overstate how the city, and that being the mayor, the city manager, city council, the city attorney, how they should be commended for doing this. This is truly unprecedented. This is the type of work we do. When we do it, it's usually done in two ways. One, it might be where we're zeroing in on good things someone's doing and they want that information let known to the press and to the public. Or two, we do a critical analysis, but it never meets the light of day. And it's done in such a way that it's done internally so that what will happen is changes can be made, but nobody knows that this process has taken place. So what's happened here is the city, through its leaders, determined that there are issues with the police department, and they wanted to know what those issues were and how they could start solving those issues to bring the department even to a higher level than it is today. And for that, they deserve tremendous commendation. The city perceived the problem and sought a solution. One of the city council members, and we interviewed all the members of the city council, interviewed the mayor, the city attorney, the city manager on many occasions. But one of the city council members said something very interesting. She mentioned that when she was in private industry, they always brought in outsiders to take a critical look at what they were doing because they thought that made the process better. And she rhetorically asked us, well, don't municipalities, police departments, the Department of Justice, where I'm from, do that all the time? And the answer, we kind of chuckled, was no, they never do that. And they never have an outsider look in. And again, it's unprecedented, and the city really deserves praise for that. Another thing, this report was not to zero in on the good things the police department does, that they do on a daily basis. It was a critical evaluation. It was to look at the bad things. So not only did they ask us to do an evaluation, but they wanted us to zero in on the things that were not working right, or the perception was they were not working right. So they knew this report would be critical in some instances. And that takes even more courage as a city official to be in there saying, look, if there's a problem, we want to know what it is and we want to take care of it. What was our task? We were tasked by the city to identify impediments to addressing crime within the city of Fort Myers, and more specifically within the Dunbar community. There have been a series of violent crimes that have not been solved. And so it was thought, could we come in and try to help, try to come up with some things that might benefit the police department? Now, why us? The free group, as both the mayor mentioned and the city manager mentioned, is called Free Group International Solutions. It is a risk management company. It was started by Louis Freeh, a former United States District Judge, as well as the director of the FBI. It's comprised of former judges, prosecutors, and high-level law enforcement executives. My background is I'm a former prosecutor. I spent over 25 years with the Department of Justice, and I spent over 30 years as a prosecutor. My colleague, Tom Larned, who again worked principally with me on this, served over 25 years with the FBI as a high-level executive, both here and abroad in places like Canada and Iraq. So between the two of us, we have in excess of 50 years law enforcement experience, maybe even more than that. And so it was thought that perhaps we can bring something to the table and try to help with this evaluation, this analysis. Now, let me say what we were not brought in to do. We were not brought in to do an evaluation of the community or help the community get engaged. But again, the city has brought people in to do that. There is a community engagement initiative ongoing, and that's been going on. We've met. We were tasked to meet with those people, and we did. And they're doing a very different analysis than ours. Ours was to zero in on the police department and look at the workings of the police department. Now, when we look at the police department, what was the process that we utilized? What we did was we were given, as I said earlier, unfettered access to the department and all its members. So we conducted in excess of 200 interviews. We interviewed a large number of police officers. We interviewed a large number of them many times. We promised them anonymity in their interviews so that we would get, hopefully, as candid an assessment as possible from them. And we believe they were very candid. And before going on, it's very important to mention that in our findings, the overwhelming majority of the police officers are doing a phenomenal job. They do outstanding work under trying circumstances. And leadership in the past through, and the mayor mentioned it, austerity measures, budget cuts, has really made their job even more difficult over the last few years. And that has to be taken into account. But we go through an interview process, and we meet with people, and we went through documentation, and we go through that. And through that combination, you try to come out with ideas. And we basically started with the Professional Standards Bureau for a number of different reasons, and then we moved on to investigations and operations, and basically went through as much of the police department as we can. Were there areas we were not able to go through? Yes. Our evaluation could not cover everything, not in the time frame allowed. But we feel we came to the core functions of the police department and made key findings in that regard. Some of the issues that were found, and again, what we were hoping to do is meet with the press again, maybe in 2 or 3 weeks, to go over in more substance your questions detailing certain recommendations or findings made. But in a more general matter, some of the issues found, I mentioned austerity measures. There was a buyout in 2008, and there's realities of life. And the realities of life is a police department or any municipal agency is funded by public monies. And when the public monies are down, so are the amounts of monies they get. And at that time, in 2008, there was a decision to do a buyout. And from a budgetary standpoint, it makes a lot of sense. And again, we look back, right? It's always easy to look back. It's much harder to look ahead. But when that buyout occurred, the city lost a great deal of very experienced officers. And you just don't replace that overnight. And that was a problem. And then when the budgetary problems persist and you cannot replace officers, and the officers continue to operate on a lower level in terms of numbers, their job is harder. So that officer who responds to something on the street where it would have been better to spend more time has to immediately leave that call to go to another call. And so the public then feels they're not getting the proper attention because at that call, maybe they needed that officer longer. And the public's right. But the officer had to move on to another call, and the officer is right. So there are issues when you're not properly staffed. And that's something the city is committed to address. Another one is there is a real thought within the department that preferential treatment permeated the entire organization. In other words, the great majority, if not almost every single person we interviewed, said there was a cliquish system within the department. You either were in or you were out. And many of them really felt that was a problem, as do we. But in any small organization, you're going to have that. One thing that was felt was so many of the supervisors come out of the same group, the narcotics section, and then move their way through. Now, you know, you look at it again backwards, and that might almost sound like it's a bad thing. But if you become the head of the police department, who will you normally bring in as supervisors? The other people you worked with, that you have trust with, that you know are good officers. So it makes sense. Unfortunately, it also has unintended consequences. And that is, when you have a bunch of homicides in this city that are going unsolved, people do not have the requisite background to solve those homicides. So it created some people who have extremely well thought of in one area, but don't have the requisite experience in another. And that's an issue, and that's something that the department will have to address and is committed to addressing. And the preferential treatment, again, one of the things that the city needs to be commended for greatly is to bring in an outsider as police chief. There's always good and bad reasons for everything. You know, promoting from within an organization is a very good thing to do. Promoting from without can be a good thing. In this particular instance, we felt, the Free Group, that there was only one possibility. Because if you went from within, surely that selection would have been met with cynicism and skepticism by the public. By bringing in an outsider, you've changed that dynamic. And probably that has changed a lot of the dynamic of the police department. Another issue was the failure to address certain integrity issues. We did, through our interviews, learn that there were some integrity issues within the department. That does occur, and that is something, when it occurs, must be dealt with. The way it was dealt with historically was to not deal with it. That cannot happen. That is something that needs to be addressed one way or the other. Again, the current administration, the chief, is committed to dealing with those issues and dealing with them heads on. There's no other way. You must understand that if you don't deal with them, your department is isolated, which in very many ways has happened from other law enforcement entities in the area. When we looked at the department, and again, as I said, the overwhelming majority of the officers are doing their good and very good job under very trying circumstances. They lack sufficient physical space, and this goes to support staff as well. You know, crime scene technicians, we run through it in a report. There's a lot of inadequate spacing. And as we mentioned,